Another Wednesday's come and gone, and I've got some comics. Let's talk about them. Hey, welcome to 9 Panel Grid. This week, we've seen Down on Their Luck Detectives, Perilous Magicians, and the fastest growing social network, Click Clack, not a sponsor. But we're going to kick things off this week with Barbaric, Born in Blood number 3, written by Michael Morisi with artwork by Nathan Gooden. So, Barbaric, Born in Blood, the whole series has kind of felt a little bit like the middle chapter of a book, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but it feels kind of unfinished and it kind of feels like, I don't know, like we're kicking the can down the road a little bit. I have liked overall the entire, storyline of Barbaric, but it kind of feels like we're puttering around and we need to figure out what the next step is going to be in Owen's adventures. The friendships have been bonded with these main characters. I think Michael Morisi has crafted a really good story, albeit this chapter, this series of chapters here have been just, I don't know, lackluster a little bit. And part of that might be also on Nathan Gooden's artwork. In the past, it's been fantastic. It's something that I've really held up to a high standard. With Born in Blood, though, this issue in particular and the previous two, it's kind of felt a little bit rushed. It doesn't feel complete. It feels a little bit choppy in certain areas, and it definitely doesn't feel to the standard that he had set in the previous Barbaric books. But Barbaric Born in Blood number 3, if you read it, let me know your thoughts. All right, next up, we have Dick Tracy number 4, written by Alex Segura and Michael Morisi with artwork by Geraldo Borges. So, remember the time when we were praising this book for being grounded and realistic take on the Dick Tracy character? Yeah, it feels like that's kind of fallen by the wayside. Not to say that that's a bad thing, because when I think of Dick Tracy, I think of kind of campy, hokey kind of things. But it feels like this book is kind of losing the tone that it set early on and the expectations maybe that we all set in our heads when we first started reading this series. The issues that I've had with this book kind of remain the same, and it's usually on the artistic side, where I just feel like the digital halftone usage in this book really kind of draws me out of it. I feel like it feels almost like there's blown up thumbnails more so than finished pages in some of these things. And I think that kind of is one of the downsides of people working on the digital realm when it comes to artwork. They have a lot of time to manipulate things in certain ways. Whereas working traditionally, you're kind of focused and you have a set path that you need to take here because you're working with pen and paper. The story is okay though. We follow Dick Tracy. He's kind of, he's on the outs with everyone except for his inner, circle that he's working with to solve this mystery, solve this crime. So the police are after him. The mob is after him. The only people he can lean on are his team. And, we're seeing the walls kind of close in on him. I do like the further exploration, and we kind of keep poking and prodding at it of Dick Tracy's time in the military, his time at war, and how that's impacting him. So there's a lot of interesting things that are kind of being played with in the mythology of Dick Tracy. I just feel like the tone took a weird shift that kind of drew me out of this. So Dick Tracy number 4 was a worthwhile issue, kind of just, had me feeling a little bit weird after it, though. And with our next issue, let's talk The Domain number 2, written by Chip Zdarsky with artwork by Rachel Stott. So I'm kind of juggling on how to actually review this series overall. Do I look at it in a vacuum by itself, or do I look at it as an ancillary piece to Public Domain, the thing that kind of spearheaded it and made this the spin-off book? So looking at it in a vacuum, this is a fun, decent superhero story. We saw the introduction of our main characters, how they've gotten their powers, how they view getting those powers, and I think it's all done in a fairly common but fun way. If this stood on its own, again, I don't think it's going to win any awards, but I think it'd be a fun, decent superhero book. And when we're talking about the indies and the indie publishers, specifically Image in this case, I think that's a cool thing. They've had big blockbusters like Invincible, but honestly, superhero books usually fall by the wayside. So to see something come out that is superhero centric from Image, it's pretty awesome. I kind of like that. And Chip Zdarsky, I totally trust his writing. He has great work with narration. He has those quirky things that he's able to pull out, that very specific dry humor. So I really appreciate that and love that. Now, looking at it from the perspective of it being part of public domain, it's just again, just like issue one, such a much more enriching experience because you can see the choices that the writer within public domain is making and the choices that the artist is making. And it's kind of cool to see the back and forth of all that kind of stuff and kind of see it's all kind of culminates into the book that they're making within the book. So again, really cool idea. I'm enjoying this. It does stand on its own, but I think that you're going to want to get public domain if you want to get the most out of this book. And sticking around to Image, let's talk Geiger number 5, written by Jeff Johns with artwork by Gary Frank. This is slowly but surely becoming one of my favorite series that I read month over month, and a lot of it is because of the characters within the book. The story, especially in this issue, can feel very generic. It's kind of like wrapping up what's happened with Geiger and his companion being trapped and kind of being held prisoner. Big action set pieces, so there's not a lot of plot development in this book, but it was a lot of fun, and the fun comes by way of what these characters do. We've seen Geiger's companion grow and start to take chances and start to develop into the hero that I think that he sees himself to be. Really fun, really interesting ways to look at that. And man, does Jeff Johns know how to pull at the heartstrings of the reader, because he knows exactly how to get to us, being that he puts Geiger's dog in peril. And that is something that just quite frankly cannot happen. The other cool thing about this is that they kind of play with the kryptonite trope a little bit, where Superman has his weakness. Well, now we're starting to see Geiger definitely also has a weakness now. So I think that's going to be a really cool thing that they develop as the series continues to go on. It's going to be really fun watching that develop. Overall, this was another fantastic issue to another fantastic series. So I can't wait to see Ghost Machine continue to grow and develop and change, because it's been so enriching and so like fulfilling throughout the entirety of everything we've seen. And with the most interesting book I read this week, let's talk Gilt Frame number 1, written by Margie Kint with artwork by Matt Kint. So this was the most charming and kitschy book that I've read in a very long time. And I've kind of, come to know that about Matt Kint and the books that he works on and comes out with. This book really felt like I don't know, like kind of like a Wes Anderson movie put into a comic book form. It was just like off kilter just a bit, and everything kind of felt a little bit just outside of the norm, but in a very charming way. I love that Matt Kint actually had his mother write the majority of this book, and from what I can understand, the premise was completely hers, and it revolves around kind of a mother-son duo as they kind of go through being, working through this mediocre detective type story as they go from America over to France, investigating these chairs that they have. It's kind of developing into this really cool mystery, but not like high stakes mystery necessarily. But again, like a Wes Anderson, charmy, kitschy kind of thing. I'm going to keep saying those words because I feel like they're the best to describe this book. Now, Matt Kint's artwork is a very acquired taste, and I totally get that, but I've acquired that taste. I kind of love the watercolor approach that he has, the very caricatured style of his inks and his layouts and his drawings. Really fantastic stuff. Everything looks unique. Every character, it looks very much different. If you had a lineup of characters, there's no two people that are going to look the same. So this was a really cool kickoff to a series that I think is going to be a lot of fun, given some legs here. And with an extra sized issue, it really gave them the landscape and time to really develop the characters and the storyline moving forward. Next up, let's talk Immortal Thor number 14, written by Al Ewing with artwork by Jan Balzdua. So finally, I've been begging and I've been pleading. Immortal Thor finally kicked it into high gear, and it's about time because we were due. This issue was awesome. Now, they kind of billed it as a milestone issue, the 775th issue of Thor, but like, let's be honest, let's just live with what it is. It's Immortal Thor number 14, but I enjoyed it so thoroughly. This was all about Thor, the god of thunder, taking on Zeus, the god of thunder. And it was just an epic battle. It was laid out perfectly. It was paced and written perfectly. Al Ewing is definitely playing with things within this entire series here that makes Thor feel so classic, which quite honestly he should. He's always kind of been that classic character, but now leaning on the tropes of classic comic books, especially with thought balloons, I really appreciate the tactics that he's using here because I think they play so well to that character. Now, I'm going to try to not use this as a platform to talk about the absolutely silly nature of the Stormbreaker program within Marvel, how they find these new artists and make them Stormbreakers, when in reality, they've been doing artwork that's been fantastic for decades in most of these cases. But I will talk about Jan Bell's Dua because I think that her art style and the things that she did in this issue were really, really fantastic. I like how she laid out the action scenes. I like how she laid out the dialogue as Zeus and Thor were, kind of, bantering back and forth as they were battling. Really great approach on this. I really do enjoy the artwork that's developed within this series here, as we've had a couple different artists, and every time it gets handed off here, I feel like nobody misses a step, even though they bring their own unique flair to the book. So again, so happy that Immortal Thor kind of picked up the pace again. I'm ready for it. Let's keep this momentum moving because that's exactly what this book needs. And with our next issue, let's talk Into the Unbeing #3, written by Zach Thompson with artwork by Hayden Sherman. This has been a hard series to review, but this issue I feel like finally started making it easier on me as a reader and easier on me as a person who wants to talk about comics. Zach Thompson was kind of leaning, I feel like, on tropes that had been kind of used ad nauseum from him a couple different times in a couple different series. And I was kind of critical on it because I was ready to start exploring new ideas or maybe start exploring different facets of these ideas. And I think he's starting to do that within this issue. We finally start to see character development, character growth, right? Some reason to care about these women as they're navigating their way through this earthly being that is, part mountain, part rock, but part organism that is living and growing and breathing. They're exploring the characters that are doing these kind of things, and it feels very much like The Descent, the horror movie. And I think that's kind of on brand. That's probably definitely what they're going for. But we finally have reason to care about them and really feel worried about what's happening, as they're all kind of at the point now where they have no idea what's happening. They have no idea where they're going. Some of them want to press on. Some of them want to kind of back out. And they're starting to, you're starting to see the friendships fray apart and some of the decision making and the teamwork fray apart. So it's starting to get much more interesting from a narrative perspective. Artwork is continuing to just blow me away because Hayden Sherman continues to get better and better and better with each series that he's on, with each new book that he puts out. Not only that, but his style continues to kind of tweak and grow and change with each project too, as it's almost like a chameleon aspect where he changes how he approaches things based on what the book needs. And this is definitely needing that grotesque feature. And it definitely gets that as they work their way through down the throat and in the veins of this being. So really awesome. I loved that they actually started to really pick up the pace and really start giving us some things to care about in this issue. So I'm cautiously optimistic to see where they take this from here on out. And with the first of our new #1s this week, let's talk Jonny Quest #1, written by Joe Casey with artwork by Sebastian Perez. This was way better than I ever anticipated. And I really like Joe Casey as a writer, but this one just took me totally by surprise, as I didn't really grow up with Jonny Quest. I didn't have much background besides the very specific, knowledge that I think everyone has about the character and the team of characters around him. But this was just such a pleasant book to read. It was so fun. It kind of kept the pace up. It introduced you to these characters and gave you a notion of who they are, what they are, what they want to do so quickly within this issue without really needing to have that background on each and every person. Very much appreciated. I think that was an effective way to deliver us this first issue. So kudos to you, Joe Casey. That was awesome. The artwork on here it really did lean into the animation style while keeping it cartoony in the comic book style as well. So I really appreciated that. I feel like that was kind of like marrying those two worlds without leaning too far into one or the other. The other thing I'll say here is that, again, with no background, the narration of all these characters, the way that it was written, made it so easy to just hear the voices of the characters in your head. It made it just so easy to, like, instantly recognize how these people should sound, how they talk, their cadence. Again, really effective writing on this, which is so easy. Like, the reason why it was so easy to draw me in as a reader. Again, this totally blew me away. I wasn't anticipating reading it or enjoying it thoroughly, considering I'm probably not the top demographic for this book. But I gotta say, I'm gonna follow through with this, and I definitely want to see where Jonny Quest goes from here. Next up, let's talk Kardak the Mystic #1, written by Joe Corallo with artwork by Butch Mappa. This is another new #1 that I had no background with for the characters, and I kind of loved it. Again, not the demographic for this, being that it's an Archie Universe book, and I just kind of don't read those books all that often. I know who they are, and I know what Riverdale means and all that kind of stuff, but I just, it's never been something that I grew up with. I have no nostalgic value or feeling for it. But this pulled me in. I think that Corallo did a really fantastic job here, introducing us to the characters, kind of laying out the landscape, putting their wants and needs at the forefront so that we can kind of develop this story. And that story really revolves around Kardak having to balance between if he's going to continue being a magician, like a stage magician, or if that's truly going to make ends meet, or does he have to pivot over to a career to really balance, his life out with his significant other. What this leads to really is kind of the world of mysticism and true, real magic. And magic, in that sense, usually comes at a cost. And there is definitely a cost within this book. So there's really fun things that are being explored here. It stays in tone to what I have in my head as like kind of the Archie tone, right? It's not too heavy, but it kind of plays with some aspects, plays with some notions here. So I feel like it lives effectively within that world. Now, Butch's artwork on this, I think, really it kind of plays with, again, that Riverdale Archie notion. It stays within that cartoony realm, but there are true moments, considering you're working with magic, where there's things that he plays with in the background that are truly a little bit gruesome, right? They're a little bit outside of the norm, I guess we'll say. It kind of leans almost like the EC Comics kind of vibe to it, which I totally appreciate. I think that it kind of was just the sprinkle on top, right? It didn't overwhelm the issue, but it was just what it needed considering what we're working with. So again, another new #1, another #1 that totally satisfied me. Next up, let's talk Profane #3, written by Peter Milligan with artwork by Raul Fernandez. This continues the storyline of our detective who is kind of in the real world, even though he is a fictional character, a fictional detective within a book series, and his adventures as he tries to solve the mystery of the murder of the writer who created him. The series continues to grow and develop, and I love how they're taking jabs at the things that they're. It's truly a love letter too, which is kind of the detective tropes, the detective noir storylines, and just the nature of the fictional world and the real world, and how those two things work together. This issue specifically really, really leans heavily into that, as we find out that the villain of the entire series that we're working within is the villain of the book series that they've all come out of, too. So I really like how they're kind of marrying those two things and having them work together. It's definitely like this really meta take on creators and creations and how they kind of play together. The other thing too is that I like how they're working with these characters into the notion of free will, especially with our fictional characters, how they, at certain points they understand that they're fictional characters and their actions are determined by the writer who is writing the story for them. But also when we look at the quote unquote real characters in this book and how they interact with one another, knowing that they are kind of dictated by the writers of their story, right? And the writers are circumstantial, right? It could be your boss at work, it could be the guy that cuts you off in traffic, or it could be the fictional detective who you have a choice to kill or save within your story. So I love the way that they're looking into those different aspects and how they're saying, hey, free will can be looked at in a lot of different ways. So Peter Milligan's doing a really effective job on this. I think that each issue has gotten progressively better, and it's made the entire series more and more interesting as time has gone on. And with our next issue, let's talk The Ultimates #3, written by Dennis Camp with artwork by Juan Frigeri. Dennis Camp is working with really big ideas with each and every issue of the series, and I just so appreciate it. The first book that I ever read from him was 20th Century Men in Image, that I believe came out maybe a year ago at this point. And I feel like he's kind of taking a Marvel look at those same kind of aspects and those same kind of ideas that he was playing with. It's really cool to see how some of our characters that we grew up with, albeit their ultimate versions, how he's kind of taking those and inverting them in some cases and rolling them out in completely different ways in some cases. But again, they're really big ideas. And in this issue specifically, he's kind of talking towards humanity from the good guy's perspective, right? What it means to be humane. And I think that they kind of toy with that, and they really talk about some heavy, weighty ideas that come along with that, specifically when they're coming to this island that Bruce Banner has been experimenting on and doing gamma radiation experiments amongst the island and the people of that island, and what that means and what that looks like, and how sometimes the notion of helping people isn't the same help that they necessarily want or need. So I like the way that they're having that conversation and how they're weaving that into the story, because it is integral to superheroics and superheroes, because humanity is who they serve, who they protect, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that they have all the answers, and it's coming to show in this book right here. And I think that Dennis Camp is, again, working it through so effectively. This continues to be one of the weightiest Ultimate books, right? And I feel like it's the largest scope and the biggest idea kind of book that the Ultimate line has put out so far. And I'm definitely here for it. I want to see how they continue to develop and grow these ideas, because I think it's going to continue to be more and more fascinating as time goes on. Next up, we have social media's favorite, or maybe least favorite team right now. Let's talk X Factor #1, written by Mark Russell with artwork by Bob Quinn. This was deviously humorous. If you were a fan of Mike Allred's run and Peter Milligan's run of X-Force and X-Statix back in the day, this is very much akin to that kind of feeling, right? And those kind of ideas that they were playing with, albeit this feels much more connected to the reality of what's happening within the Marvel Universe, and specifically the world of mutants post Krakoa. Mark Russell has kind of like made a name for himself of being a satirical writer. But in having conversations with him and reading like a lot of his books, I feel like the satire comes from a real place of like truly looking at the world that we live in, and sometimes the world that these characters live in, right? And really putting it under a microscope and calling it what it is. And I think that's where this book really shines, where the mutants are being seen from a lot of different aspects at this point here. They're being looked at as terrorists, they're being looked at as immigrants, they're being, looked at from a lot of different ways from even their own people, right? Other mutants are also like looking at one another and the choices that they make and really casting judgment upon one another. It plays with a lot of those different ideas, and it also plays with a lot of ideas of corporate sponsorship and what that means, as well as X Factor is a government-based team that is also, kind of sponsored by a company that is out to make money based on the celebrity status that these mutants have. So a lot of different ideas that they're going to play with here. This has a lot of consequences that come into play with this first issue, as remember, if they're corporate sponsored and they are government based, it doesn't necessarily mean that this team is going to go on missions that their heart is in, or that maybe they should even have any kind of, investment in whatsoever besides the almighty dollar. So again, Mark Russell writing a extremely humorous book, but it's something that is very scathing, right? And it definitely has a message behind it. So to see him work in the greater Marvel universe with those ideas is totally worthwhile here, and I'm definitely along for the ride with it. Sticking with the world of mutants, let's talk X-Men #2, written by Jed MacKay with artwork by Ryan Stegman. So when I read issue #1, I didn't quite know what I was getting into, right? Because everything was new and everything was fresh, and we had just gotten out of this extremely long run of kind of the mutant books and had a very distinct notion towards what they were doing. And I feel like I've now got a grasp on at least what X-Men by Jed MacKay is doing. X-Men by Jed MacKay, if you're a fan of the 90s run of X-Men, you're going to absolutely love this. It's got a lot of bombastic notions, it's got a lot of action, it's very kinetic. It's not necessarily story and plot heavy. There's not a lot that you need to carry through finding out what's happening with these characters from issue to issue. It's very much of the moment, and it's just boom, boom, boom. It's supposed to deliver just, the tastes that you want if you want those action beats over and over and over. So if that's the kind of book you're here for, this is all for you, because the artwork, again, it's kinetic. It's got those kind of like anime vibes and flair that you kind of anticipate from Stegman, right? Exaggerated caricatures of these people, especially like, Cyclops' visor is huge when he blasts. It's enormous. The action set pieces, again, they're big, they're laid out. It's that's what this book is, right? It's supposed to be fun, energetic, and kinetic. It delivers on all those aspects. If you're looking for a weighty, thoughty book where they're going to be pushing boundaries, maybe this isn't for you. But that's okay too, because we're working with Marvel, we're working with superheroes, and I feels like this is kind of the mission statement for that book. And if that's what they're doing, it's totally effective. And with our runner-up pick of the week this week, let's talk Elric the Necromancer #2, written by Julian Blondell with artwork by Valentine Sechier. This one took me by surprise as I read issue #1, and I feel like it was not necessarily as effective as an introductory issue for someone with no background for Elric, or very little background, but it gave me enough to where I still wanted to dive in and find out what was going on, as this was a Titan book. The artwork was really good, and it had high fantasy vibes to it, right? And we don't have enough of that in the comic landscape, I feel like, right now. So when I read issue #2, I gotta say, I feel like they took those critiques to heart, even though there's no way that they knew that I was thinking that, but they ramped them all up to 11. This has all those high fantasy tropes, but they deliver them, and they do so without feeling trite. Elric is, i- he's just an awesome character to follow through. It's almost akin to The Witcher, right? Where I don't want to say down on his luck, but he's almost like he's like a depressed character. He's just navigating through this world, knowing that he's felt great loss and that he'll continue to feel great loss throughout all of his days being an immortal. The characters that he interacts with, though, are really fascinating, and I love to see how they kind of develop throughout this issue here, as he's working with a queen as they're trying to stop this tower that has, kind of just grown out of nothing, right? And there's just chaos that is ensuing all around it, and it's definitely emanating from this tower. So we go through the storyline, and we kind of see that some of the people that work for the queen are probably maybe not working for the queen necessarily. There's a little bit of a power struggle here, but all throughout the issue, again, it's laid out perfectly. The artwork is fantastic in this. I kind of love that they're playing with these different little notions. And there's certain things in here, specifically when it comes to the artwork, when they get into this chaos tower. I love how they play with the layouts, where there's like these impossible landscapes, and there's these like MC Escher like staircases. But when they go through them, they don't just change the landscape, but they change everything about where the characters are. So when you have word balloons and a person is upside down, that word balloon is also upside down. It makes it a little bit difficult to read, but I think it's also a fun, playful thing to do within that book, knowing that you have characters here and characters here, one upside down, one right side up, and kind of how they would be interacting with one another as well. So I think that was kind of cool. The downside, the only downside, if I have anything, with those word balloons is I feel like the font choices and the balloon choice that they have is really kind of jarring. And the word balloons themselves, they're never rounded, but they're always squared off and jagged. And it really kind of takes me out of the experience. I think that a more traditional approach, or maybe if you're going to go high fantasy, I think maybe there's just a better way to approach it overall. Wasn't terrible by any means, but it was enough to kind of make me feel like, maybe there was a better choice there. But again, Elric the Necromancer #2, awesome choice for a book this week. And with our top comic of the week, let's talk Precious Metal #3, written by Darcy Van Polgeest with artwork by Ian Bertram. This is just a series that continues to get better and better with each issue, and issue 1 itself was also setting the standard extraordinarily high. So this issue revolves around Max, our main character, and he's kind of dealing with his past and kind of like trying to reconcile the choices that he's made in his past and in real time, as well as the story is kind of paced between 3 different characters. We have Max, we have Jelly, one of the people that Max kind of worked for but double crossed him, and another person who is working or was working with the 12, the, kind of the villains of this storyline, but has turned her back on them and is trying to work with Max in their journey to save this boy who's been kidnapped by them because of his mod powers. The pacing of this issue was really fantastic as we work between these people, right? It just keeps shooting between each character in real time as these real actions are taking place. And I love the way that everything is laid out and how each part of the storyline is basically handed off to the next as we continue to see the consequences of each person's actions and what continues to happen as everything kind of comes to a boiling point. This was a real heady, weighty issue because it deals with a lot of dreamlike sequences and dreamlike essences, basically, that it's going to take a couple reads, right? This is one that you want to flip through a couple different times because there's so many different interpretations that you can take from this, as Max is being like kind of like drugged down into, into nothingness at certain points. And is it a dream? Is he really experiencing these things? What does it mean when he meets this quote unquote angel? I don't want to give any spoilers away. And even if I did, I don't know how you would interpret it and if it'd be the same way that I did. But what I can tell you is that Precious Metal has been absolutely stupendous from start to the midway point right now. It's already a contender for best book of the year at this point. It's definitely going to be putting up a fight for sure. And it's a book that every single person, if you enjoy comics, if you enjoy reading, should be looking out for because it's just, again, stupendous. So that's the top comic for the week. And that's what I've got for you this week, but I'm more curious. What did you read and what were your thoughts? Do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe, and be part of the panel. Leave me a comment down below. Thanks again for watching. We'll talk to you next week.